I know.
Welcome to another session of Dancing with Change in Facility Management. I'm very pleased actually to have a guest that is going to discuss procurement in facility management. And I would like you to meet our guest, Maureen Sullivan. She is a lawyer, a procurement lawyer. She's had a very successful legal career. She's been deeply immersed in the world of procurement for over 20 years, hence the expertise. She's assumed ownership of National Education Consulting, Inc. in 2009 and embarked on transitioning its award-winning procurement training programs to the online environment. We were just talking about that. As owner, curriculum developer, and lead instructor, Maureen has worked with over 100 public and quasi-public organizations to design custom training solutions. So she's a sought-after speaker at supply chain and procurement conferences and events. She has delivered over 10,000 hours of training and was named to the top 100 women in supply chain in Canada in 2019. She is also the author of a guide to practical procurement, and since divesting her interest in her company, NECI, which is now the Procurement School, she consults as a fairness monitor and process advisor to organizations committed to transparency in procurement. So, on that note, welcome, Maureen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Kathleen. Always fun.
Well, there's certainly a lot of procurement activity and facility management. I mean, frankly, they are involved in procuring supplies for various things. They're involved in procuring services also for various things, and they're also involved in procuring contracts for construction. So right from, you know, procuring design expertise, architects, engineers, and so on, contractors for sure, and everything in between, and including various testers to make sure things work. So their life does definitely involve a lot of procurement. So that's been going on for a long time. The change that's happening in that predominantly, for the most part, I mean, there's always change going on, but it is certainly our current climate of tariffs and what that has meant to various organizations. And I think, a good deal of that is the chaotic nature of not having anything defined or having things constantly changing. And again, that's not unusual for FM. So I'd kind of like to get your thoughts on how we can advise facility managers to handle these challenges around changing pricing and suppliers and so on um, in this current time.
Yeah, and I mean, change is inevitable, right? Nothing's constant except change. And I think, as you said, it's not the tariffs themselves, it's the uncertainty around it. I
Mhm.
mean, people are walking on jello right now, like what's going to happen. And when I think about it from the facilities management perspective, as you say, they do kind of soup to nuts. So they're getting everything. One thing that occurred to me as we were sort of talking about this in prep is that the buyer wants long-term contract, the seller wants short-term contract and uncertainty. So how do you walk that balance? And I was thinking, one way to go at it is if you because you want some certainty as a facilities manager. First of all, price is almost irrelevant. You want to make sure someone's available and that they stay in business and things like that. So if you can have some kind of maybe a longer term contract, maybe something under like a master standing arrangement where the terms and conditions are set, and even if you can lock in pricing with regular renegotiation points, so
Ah,
that maybe you got a 4-year contract, but every 6 months we relook at price, depending what's appropriate, of course. And if you can tie that relook at pricing to some kind of independent standard, the consumer price index or the steel index or whatever's appropriate, then you've got some parameters. It's not a wide open negotiation every 6 months. But that way the supplier's kind of locked in for 4 years, but they know they're not going to have to, first of all, buffer in the worst case scenario and give you a super high price and have no chance. And they've got the comfort of knowing that there's ability within that contract to bob and weave as things change, because we don't know where this is going to land. We don't know what the end game, we don't know what it's going to look like a month from now, never mind a year from now, right?
Yeah,
So
no.
it takes some thinking about how to do it, but that if I were in that boat, I would probably, for my key suppliers, look at trying to lock them in long term, but giving them the comfort that that there's some flexibility on pricing, so they're not going to get, hosed, to use a Canadian term. If the pricing changes and they're locked in. So that's one approach, certainly.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually really good advice. And just thinking through this, that typically an organization's facility managers and everyone else actually presents an annual budget. Now, because organizations run on annual budgets, but they also have the challenge of multi-year commitments. So whether it's a project, whether it is a supplier, so I think that makes really good sense, and that facility managers really need to think about having this flexibility presented to their board of directors or CEO suite or whatever, so there won't be too many surprises along the budgeting train as well,
Right.
because that certainly is going to have impact on all kinds of things. So that's excellent advice for sure. One
And
thing,
if I can just interrupt, I would say the
yeah,
thing when you're in this uncertain environment, just make sure that your senior executive understands why you've had to build in these renegotiation points or this flexibility. So it's not a surprise to them. And as you say, the challenge is keeping it within the budget. But sometimes they sort of operate in a bit of a vacuum, and they think fixed price, we should have it for 4 years. What's going on here? So set the stage for them, give them the heads up. They know what's going on in the world, but they may not have translated it into the contract and budgeting process.
yeah, oh, that's terrific advice. I think as well that, and I'm sure you have seen this in training various organizations and personnel, that for the most part, depending on size, of course, but most organizations have a dedicated procurement professional. And that procurement professional would handle procuring everything. So if it's, for instance, facility managers work in hospital environments. So if they have a procurement expert, the organization is going to be buying stuff for the medical side too. And even within the facility management side, I mean, the variety of purchasing they do. Well, if we just use hospitals as an example, they also buy food products because they have food services running, right? So, how would you advise facility managers to handle the kinds of changes? Well, food management is such a great idea for contending with tariffs, because it's really screwed up the supply chain, right? And currently, and our audience is global, but we're Canadian. We're talking about the Canadian context. So really, organizations have had to pivot to different suppliers simply because of availability or not of product they used to have.
Right. Yeah, and I think we all sort of took a little bit of a crash course with COVID, you know,
Yes.
trying to get PPE or trying to get something that suddenly your supplier, you can't even get a hold of them, that kind of thing. So we've had a little bit of an introduction to it already. I mean, it's really just an extension of what we've always dealt with, which is change is inevitable, changes internationally. The tariffs do add a layer of complexity to it, but yeah, when you're buying a huge range of things, just recognize that procurement, they're experts in procurement, but they don't necessarily know your business.
Right.
So do what you can to sort of edge your way into the planning stage. When I'm working with procurement teams, I'm like, your users, they're your business clients. You need to involve them on the front end. Like, what do they want? How are they going to measure it? What happens if they don't get it? Like, bring them in. They are the experts. The reason you're going to market is for them. And not all procurement teams take that at face value, but so many times I hear from procurement is, oh, we went out, we got the best deal. And then the client comes along and says, oh, we don't like that company. We've got a horrible track record with them. Well, how come we didn't know? Well, that's your job as procurement, I say, to involve them and find out what you don't know in the planning stage. And if you're in an organization as a facilities manager where you're sort of locked out, and I call it that sort of cold handoff, between procurement and facilities manager. So they get the contract and then they hand it off to you, and then never the twain shall meet. Like, do what you can to try and get yourself involved. Say, hey, we got this big procurement coming up. I know you guys are the experts, but maybe I can just take some of your time and explain the things that I need to have in the contract, because that's where you have the leverage, is in the procurement and the planning. Once the contract's signed, really tough to start making changes to it. So think about what you want them to know. How are we going to measure this? How are we going to monitor it? What kind of tools do we need in there? Are our standard contracts up for the task now that we have all these changes looming? So I'm a huge fan of, working together as a team. And as I said, if your organization doesn't encourage that, try and elbow your way in, see what you can do, because it makes their job easier, makes your job easier. And it really takes the two levels of expertise coming together to get something that you can manage.
Oh, absolutely. I fully support that. And that's always been a bit of a gap. It is very organizationally specific, I'd say, that depending on how much personnel within organizations interact. But there has been an ongoing standard complaint, I'll be clear on that, from facility managers, particularly where it surrounds construction projects. And it has everything to do with the requirements being designed into a solution that they may not have had input into. And
Right.
then having to take over the project, well, it's done, everybody's gone home, and they're left holding a bag of stuff they don't know about. And I mean, it's unfortunate that any project would play out that way, but that is a huge, huge complaint from facility managers.
Oh, absolutely. And as I say, like, the horse has left the barn once you've got the contract in your hand, right? So you
Right?
want to be in that sort of planning stage if you can. And if not, if you're in that situation and you're stuck with something that's really difficult to manage, at least there's your opportunity now to close the loop next time.
Yes.
And you say, look, we might not be able to fix this contract, but these are all the things that we would have done differently had we been involved in that conversation, and maybe use it as a way to kind of explain why it's so important to get you guys on the front end. I mean, I always say to procurement, you are not the subject matter experts of the content. You are the subject matter experts of the process. And so facilities managers, I think you need to know a little bit about procurement, because I thought you were going to say the other complaint I hear from facility managers, it takes so long. And procurement's this roadblock, and we can never get anything through them when they put all these hurdles in our way. Well, if you understand the process within which they operate, particularly in public sector, where there are layers and layers and layers of expectations and policy and transparency obligations, if you get a bit of a lens into their world, that can kind of help alleviate some of your own angst as well. So it's always that balance between the two, the process and the content, and they absolutely need to be incorporated on the front end before you move forward to get the best results. Because once you got the contract, and it's full of holes, right? So the best contract manager in the world really can't do much with a contract that's full of holes. And yet the best contract in the world does no good if it sits on the shelf. So when I work in this field, I say it's really two pieces. You got to have a great solid contract, and you have to have the skill set and the people involved that are going to manage it and stay on top of it and invoke those remedies and catch it early and all of those things. So you really need those two pieces. But if the contract's full of holes, not much you can do with it. You might be able to tweak it a little bit and rely on a bit of supplier goodwill to kind of manage your way through the project, but it's not ideal. Yeah.
No, actually, that is so true. it is that partnership, but it must be a partnership, certainly in my experience, because there's a focus on really two different things. And it's when you're trying to get things done, certainly in the facility management world, that's your focus. And you want
Mhm.
to really get it done. And you want to, of course, get it done right so that you don't have all kinds of cost overruns and other things. Pricing seems to be a big driver. We had this experience, it goes back numerous years, but where procurement was actually handled by facility management individually. And so there was this one supplier. He got named Bargain Herald because his company kept getting contracts from this one facility manager in this one area. So we had to go, uh-oh, okay, so what's going on here? So I think it's really important, for many reasons, to be really transparent about how you approach these things, because the marketplace knows, regardless, that
Yeah, and that's such an excellent point that I was going to add in is it's one thing about getting your projects off the ground properly and running properly, but on the very front end, you want to attract the best suppliers. And they can see when that RFP and that contract is full of holes, and either the good ones will probably avoid it, the bad ones will try and take advantage of it. So every document that's released to the marketplace speaks volumes about the organization. So a good solid contractor that wants to have a good experience is going to look for those opportunities. It's clearly laid out. They've got the right technical information. They know what they're doing. So that now, okay, so it's worth our while getting into this one. Because most of the good contractors, they don't want to be involved in some dog's breakfast of a contract, right? If you're a fly by night, you might want to sort of get your foot in the door knowing you can extra it and make all your money on extras. But the good ones, in my experience, they'll walk away from anything that's really sloppily put together, or clearly there wasn't that collaboration and the technical stuff is off, or they don't have the right details. So there's that piece as well. I mean, especially in a tight market, depending on what you're working on, you want to stand out. You want to be that opportunity that rises to the top of the pile when they have choices. And the way you do that, clear documents, clear expectations, good contract management, good reputation at the end of the day. So all those pieces sort of precede you into the market. Yeah.
oh, that's such good advice because, certainly in facility management, they manage buildings over a long horizon of time. And, certain equipment obviously gets changed out sooner than others, but there's still fairly long horizon time. So it's really important in the facility management world to be seen as a reliable client for sure.
Yeah.
And you, as a facility manager, really do want to attract quality providers, service providers, equipment providers, because it just works out better for everybody. So, yes, reputationally in the marketplace, it's really good for both the buyer and the sellers to be aware of that, right? And to really
Yeah.
stick to higher, just higher performance, quite frankly. So,
And it's the managing of the contract. Like I spend a lot of time in the book and in my training about, once the contract's in place, that's like the wedding. Now you got the marriage, right? Now you got to manage this
good
thing,
one.
right?
Yes.
So you want to be that sort of fair and reasonable, but not a doormat. And it is a fine line. Your first obligation is to get best value for your organization. So you have to keep your eye on quality, but you also have to have a little bit of flexibility. If the supplier runs into a problem that they didn't anticipate outside of their control, you have to have a little bit of latitude with them. And I think that's where the respect for you as a facilities manager is going to go up. When you're working with the contract, you're not letting them off the hook, but you have that little bit of wiggle room. So you work with them when something goes wrong, they work with you. I would say it's that relationship that gets you over the holes in the contract or those hiccups that nobody anticipated. So,
Right.
and once you have a good working relationship, then it gets easier each time you run a contract with them, right? So they get to know who the good ones are to work with and who are the bad ones. And you really want to stand out as well. Yeah, it's a tough
That
line.
is that's actually, I think, really pinning the approach to the challenges and change today, because I mean so much of what's changing in the marketplace with tariffs and so on, yeah, well, in the whole global supply chain as well, is that trust is a huge issue. And the more you can establish trusting behavior between facility management as the executors and your contractors and suppliers as partners in that, I think the further the whole program goes towards succeeding and having to make adjustments on the fly, which they're having to do right now for sure. But I think
Yeah.
that, yeah, that's probably a far better approach, just to remain successful going forward. So
Yeah, and to attract, even to attract the best ones, if the contract is set up such that, if the price fluctuates more than 2% in either direction, we'll sit down and discuss it. Even if that never happens, just the fact that it's a possibility in the contract is going to give the contractor confidence that, okay, this is a reasonable organization to work with. They know that things could change. It gives me comfort, it gives them comfort. And then if it comes to pass, you've got some parameters. It's not just, okay, gloves are off, we're going to renegotiate.
great.
That's not something you want to do periodically throughout a longer term contract, but that flexibility to take into account really things outside of our control. New tariffs come in, or a new law comes in, or there's taxation issues, or there's a strike, or there's a pandemic, or, like in this day and age, I think flexibility, at least within your contract, to take into account the possibility of changes critical. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. And I'm just thinking about, some of the time that I spent doing work in remote areas, and that holds its own challenges because
Oh, yeah.
you cannot depend on even transportation modes that change with weather. They're
Right.
dependent
Right.
on weather. And so you really do have to build flexibility into your contracts and relationships like right up front. So that's really, really good advice. And actually, yes, it's not just the tariffs, it's always been the case. So
Yeah. And those remote locations add the extra level. I remember working with a major energy corporation up in very northern remote areas. Like if the power goes out, people die.
yeah.
Like this is not just, oh, we wait until the weather clears. Like, so depending on a hospital environment, you've got like toxic hazardous waste issues, and you've got, failure of equipment, catastrophic failure. Like there's a lot to have to really factor in depending on the environment you're in. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that we were contending with, and it's still the case because it's just remote Canada, is winter roads. And indeed,
Mhm.
the only way you could get to some of these locations, these communities, was during the winter on a winter road, before it melted. Or
Yes.
something, while it was still uh, able to travel. And I mean, there has been many stories of transport trucks getting consumed by the water because the road failed or whatever. So, I mean, those kinds of dangers are not probably, every organization's concerns, but they are definitely something that needs to be, thought about in risk management in terms of
Yes.
every contract, I'd say, because the risks are there. They might be different from area to area. They
Yeah.
are contract to contract and the type of work. But one of the things that facility managers are quite versed in and honing their skills even more is dealing with resilience and emergency situations. So
Yes. Yes. Expect the unexpected. And I always say it's sorry, it's managing risk. It's not risk elimination, right? If it was risk elimination, we wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. So it's just recognizing where the risks are the greatest and doing your best in your contract to apportion them appropriately. gone are the days where we try and shift all the risk onto the contractors because you just end up paying for things that may or may not materialize. So again, thinking, how can we balance this? Like who's most appropriate for handling that particular risk? And then what do we do with those things outside of our control? I remember I was at a conference and I think it was Jim Nichols from the city of Calgary was talking. But remember when Calgary had that huge flood?
Yes, yes.
Right during right when Stampede was coming and they were all underwater. It happened on a Sunday, and Jim's like, okay, so I'm calling my team. We all raced to the office. Well, because the electronics are down, we couldn't use our key card to get into the building. Like we had to break into our own building to get to where it was like all the things like you really don't anticipate, but you can anticipate a lot of them. But yeah, I just thought it was a great story how they all pulled together on that. But expect the unexpected too.
Well, you know what? You've introduced, I think, a situation that is risky in itself. So, which is technology, right?
Oh,
And
yes.
technology is connected to power. You lose one, you're going to lose the other, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So we need to, as facility managers and all kinds of workers, need to think through these and anticipate that that is going to happen. One of the things we're exploring right now, and we'll continue to explore, are data centers. And
Mm.
firstly, the power consumption, the cooling required, and how that fits into sustainability, and how there may be opportunities for using latent heat for another facility and or producing power on site as opposed to trying to rely on a grid that may not be reliable, right? So all of these risks that are certainly touching on the management of the physical environment and the power that feeds it and so on, are really then opening up all kinds of thought that needs to happen around contracts, right?
Yeah,
And
and there's almost nothing new out there. I mean, even you think about catastrophic power failures, hospitals have been dealing with that forever,
yes,
right? They have to have backup systems, they have to have redundancy, they have to have, so we can take lessons maybe from other areas as well. Like, up in the remote north, they have to deal with the fact that power could go out. It's like that's just a fact of life for them, right? So
yes,
So we think it's brand new, but really a lot of these things have been dealt with for eons from other organizations. But we have become much, much more dependent on technology. And like, I don't know what would happen to a city if the entire power went out for a week. Like, I don't know. We had that example over in Europe, remember? And where
that's
was
right.
that? Spain. It was Spain. Yeah. And I remember seeing videos of, they just brought their sandwiches out into the square and everybody just sat around and drank wine. I'm like, well, that's good for a day or two, but you got to think about longer term. Yeah.
That might be a little more difficult in the northern part of Canada too.
Yeah, that's right. And that's kind of that culture. I don't know what we would probably just all run around with our heads cut off, not knowing what to do. But
Well,
yeah,
the
as facilities managers, your role to be at least considering these things and trying to put some protections in place or at least something in the contract that maybe you got a backup. Maybe you need two suppliers, a primary supplier and a backup supplier in case something happens with your primary supplier in those critical kinds of situations.
No, that's so true. And I think again that one of the challenges for facility managers is to tell this story to their C-suite, to their organization, so
Yeah.
that particularly from a financial perspective, because it's not always absolute what the costs are, and also with contracts, perhaps more with service contracts or construction contracts, timelines change. And when organizations look solely at an annual budget without understanding cash flow of over projects, probably extends more than 1 year, that there needs to be a very clear consideration and dialogue about that. And I think within contracts themselves, one of the things I'm sure heard of this. One of the things that bothers contractors a great deal right now is the time for payment, right? So there's there needs to be very clear consideration in contracts about payment terms and the timeline to do it. And I think there also needs to be that conversation with the people in the finance department of the organization. So you have advised, and very rightly so, having this partnership with procurement and facility management. But I think it also needs to involve finance because at the end of the day, um, money makes the world go around. And,
That's right. Yeah. And when it comes to payment, I think in larger organizations and or public sector organizations, they tend to lose sight of how important cash flow is to the contractors. If there's any way you can shorten up that payment cycle, instead of your usual 60 days, maybe we can do 30 days. We're going to stand out. That's going to make a difference when they're deciding which opportunity they want to, what organization they want to work with or which opportunity. So yeah, very good point is working with finance. And can we shave that? Can we bring it down? And then, as you say, the sort of cross cycle budgeting that, be like any other risk management, prepare your C-suite for
yeah,
this potential risk, like
yeah,
we're setting this up as best we can, but there's some variables that could throw this all out the window and we got to get this work done. Yeah.
yeah. I think it really is. It's a question of interacting frequently and having conversations. So teaming up, facility managers are really good at that because their business is all about teams. I I need to tell you this story though. I was in an organization. We had a very important construction project going on, and the contractor was excellent. Their people were amazing. They were very much involved, and their office was just down the street. But just because of past policy and so on, the finance people were they were used to mailing the checks. But, from the location, it went from this city
Mhm.
way over to that city because that had to do with the postal system. And then all only to come right back to this city, the project of origin, and 2 blocks down the street from the location. So I had to bring that up to them and say, there's no value here. I know this is typically you like to leave it to the last minute to mail the check, but then that adds 2 more weeks when we can have a very happy contractor and a good relationship continuing. But if we just invite the contractor to the office, pick up your check, we're cool.
Yes, and what that brings up in my mind is today in Canada, we are on the brink of a Canada postal strike.
Yes.
I'm wondering how many checks are in the mail, conversations are we going to have over the next little while? I mean, like e-transfers is really sort of taken over that kind of risk to a certain extent, but a lot of organizations still kind of just mail out the check. How many people today are just going to blindly mail out that check from accounts payable and not think about the fact that, you know what, this could really hamper our contractors? Again, back to that cash flow. They got staff to pay, they've got overhead to cover, right?
Yes, and prompt payment is so
Yeah.
critical to all of
Yeah.
them. No,
Yeah.
it is about team play, and I think certainly, interacting with all of your team in other departments is always critical. Is there something that can be included in contracts that sets the stage for prompt payment and that can actually quell any worries from the contracting side that that would be a problem.
Well, I think, what jumps to mind, of course, is e-transfer because it happens automatically. But then back to our earlier conversation, if the system goes down, you're going to want an actual check, but then you probably can't deposit it anyway. So, I mean, it's like the world is a myriad of risks.
Yes,
But definitely addressing it clearly in the contract, making a commitment, how, because they need to know that when they're even bidding
sure.
on the project. If you don't pay for 120 days, they need to know that, right? So, you don't want to leave it up to chance. You don't want them all those phone calls to accounts payable, all of that kind of thing. So as with most things in your contract, clear expectations and then staying on top of it and managing it and knowing that the various players who are obligated, like accounts payable, okay, in our contracts, it says this. So make sure that we meet that commitment because we spend so much time thinking about are the contractors meeting their commitment? But the reality is it's a two-way street. If we're
Yeah.
not meeting our commitments, then we can't expect that back from them. So making sure your various team members understand what their piece of the obligation is.
Gee,
Yes.
that's such good advice because yeah, I think that, the organization issuing the contract is always concerned about who they are going to get. But I think they do lose sight of their obligation also to the contract. So
Yeah. You
that's
really
really good.
want, in this environment in particular, you want to stand out as an owner of choice. We call it that sort of owner of choice. You want to, and you're not going to create that reputation overnight, but you could destroy it overnight in one procurement. So think about building those long-term relationships, having balanced contracts, treating them responsibly, treating them fairly, doing what you say you're going to do, following up on their commitments, invoking your remedies. And, over the long term, you will be an owner of choice, but it takes some time to build that reputation.
So I'm going to throw this out as a question. Do you think there's value, firstly, and can you include it in a contract to do a post-contract review? Like what worked well, what can we do better next time? And can you write that into the contract itself so that, there's learning that happens with every interaction instead of just, whew, got through that one sort of thing and then go on to repeat something that didn't work.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it is capturing those lessons learned, on both sides. And sometimes it's just an internal review, okay, let's get together, talk with our contract managers, what worked, what didn't. For those larger projects, though, bring in the contractors and have those candid conversations. It can't just be, oh yeah, you were great, oh yeah, you were great. That's wasting everybody's time. But letting them know in the contract that there is going to be this post-contract evaluation phase, whatever you call it, let them know, it might be an hour, it might be a couple of hours so that they know how much time they're going to have to spend on it. And then throughout the project, they're going to be thinking about, okay, what can I bring forward at that meeting? What are some suggestions that I have? I think that's a great idea. I mean, doing the same thing over again, expecting a different result, we know what that is, right? So why not capture those lessons learned? We talk about it in procurement. Every time you close that file, you should be capturing what did we do well? What did we do poorly? How can we do better next time? But I like that of bringing the contractors in as well, particularly those significant projects. They want it to go better next time as well. So they may and be prepared for some candid, at the end of the contract, they've already been paid. You're going to get some candid comments there. Take it as constructive. I think and it helps to solidify that relationship. We really want you to help us make this as good as possible. That it sends that message that this is a collaborative thing. So I think that's really critical. Yeah, really important.
I think that certainly with my experience that putting that requirement actually for a post-contract review in the documents themselves is really useful because my experience with one such incident, we sat down with the general contractor at the end of the job, and it was most contracts have challenges, and tried to have this conversation about, okay, what worked, what can we do better next time? And there was a real hesitancy on the part of the GC to actually say anything. And I that was the the room was filled with this caution, which is unfortunate because you don't learn anything when someone's unwilling or feeling, you know, at an unease with communicating those things because and so I think that from that experience we then shifted to you know more weekly or bi-weekly, okay, what worked, what can we do better next time, because then there's a shift in action
Yeah.
that you can actually adjust and then work through better end results. Now, I mean, a lot of that is contained within the lean approach to design and construction. And that's a huge value part of taking that approach. But I think that unless you get that into the contract documents, it walks away and you just don't have it.
Yes, definitely. And as I said, the other thing that it does, if it's in the contract, first of all, I mean, it is a time commitment for the contractor to attend those meetings. So letting them know up front and letting them know that these are the things that we expect to be discussing. We want you to take some candid note of what we can do better and set it so that all the way through the contract, they've got their eye on that and they're thinking about that. And then you're going to get, and so much, as you know, is how you set the tone of the conversation going in, right? You want them to know that this is just for learning purposes and all of that. But I can see contractors like, oh, I'm not going to say anything. Yeah, it was good. Pay me. Like they're not going to say anything, right? But if you sort of set it up as part of the contract expectations, it's sort of the final phase, then hopefully you'll get a bit more out of it because they are a great source of learning. Like they've seen things from their side that you would probably miss, or they may have ideas. They've seen other clients do it a different way, and maybe they can give you some ideas. It's a huge source of information. Yeah, very
And I
valuable.
really like the advice to actually get it into the contract because it does set expectation. And
Right,
I think it sets a certain sense of ease and
right.
comfort so that it's not confrontational. It's like we're in this together and
Yeah,
we can learn from each other kind of
it
thing.
sets that collaborative tone right from the beginning. You
Yeah.
know, okay, part of our expectation here is that we will share these lessons learned and work from that. So, yeah, good plan. Yeah,
So I think that, we've only touched on the surface here, but really procurement is such an important partner in work that facility management does, certainly in virtually every aspect. And I think that, what you have talked about as advice to facility managers is actually documenting these things within a contract so that there are no surprises, so it's clear and everyone's supportive of it and participating because it's going to result in much better success stories than leaving it out and playing adversaries because you know what contracts should never be adversarial. I don't think.
not for success. That's right. And even facilities management and procurement. Once you close the file, let's have a quick, let's meet for coffee and go over what could be better in the contract next time or what worked really well that we can expand on. Even that collaboration internally, I think, is really, that's how organizations progress and improve and get better each time.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to touch on one last thing because I'd like to hear your input on it. And this probably has more to do with government procurement in essence than private sector. And I think it has because governments are obligated by various policies to actually pursue certain organizations and whatever. And I think one of the ones that's fairly prominent in Canada is certainly looking to assist Aboriginal groups with entering the marketplace and participating and so on. And there is certainly a fair bit of procurement expertise, I would suggest, in putting together those contracts and then going to the marketplace, stating the requirements for this work so that there isn't any, I don't know, shifty things going on in response. Do you have any experience with contracts like or procurement efforts like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I mean, those are, of course, public sector in particular, they're bound by the trade agreements, got to be open, fair, transparent, et
Yeah.
cetera. There are set asides and there are programs like that where there is, as you say, Aboriginal involvement, First Nations involvement. And I think just being clear about the projects it's appropriate for and the projects it's not appropriate for. It's like any other capacity building kind of initiative.
Mhm.
There may be times in construction where you want to take, a schoolyard development and break it into smaller chunks so you can get some capacity in the market. It's the same kind of thing, but thinking about being clear, particularly if it's a First Nation set aside or something that seems to be offside the trade agreements, you want to be clear why we're doing it and what the expectations are. So yeah, there are a few of those kinds of quirks in public sector where they have to go in a certain direction, and I think it's all the same. It's building capacity and trying to expand the market so you get better value at the end of the day. There's more players. But that one's a little tricky. If you haven't explained it in your document why we're doing this, then some of the other contractors are like, well, wait a minute, why? So it's
Oh,
just a
it's true.
peculiarity. I'm sure every country has their similar kinds of experiences. Yeah.
No, that it's been my experience actually that the value of solid procurement knowledge working with the facility managers trying to get things done is so key because there's too much stuff involved that it would be easy to overlook something, and you just need that expertise to make sure that it has the potential to run very smoothly and that everybody wins in it. So
Yeah, and looking at it from potential contractors' perspectives as well.
yes.
What do we need in the document that's going to give them the information? It makes this exciting. It makes it an enticing project. The number of times, you pull up an RFP and there's just some bland generic statement in the overview. Well, most contractors won't even go beyond that. So I'm like, make it juicy, make it exciting, explain to them why they really want this contract. And that's where facilities management can help because they're the ones on the ground and they know how this particular piece might fit with a bigger project. So yeah, you really want to make it enticing if you can as well.
That's great. I love that. I've actually not heard that
Mm.
before. So marketing procurement, I love it.
Right.
It
Yes,
really
absolutely. Yeah,
it's a competitive advantage too, for
that's
sure.
right.
Absolutely. Well, this has been great. I think we've talked through a number of different scenarios for sure for procurement and some really interesting approaches to getting better at it, getting better results. So thank you very much. This has been very informative, even for me, and I've been around it for
You can never
some
have too
time.
many ideas, and just
No,
hearing something from a different perspective. I mean, a lot of people probably watching this are going, I've heard that before, but I've never heard it say it that way. It just sort of lands a little differently.
yeah.
So good, happy to help. I thought it's fun. It's such
So
a, I'm a procurement geek, so I love this stuff.
that's super. Thank you very much. And we're going to post this and hopefully if folks have burning questions or just general questions that they can feel confident in reaching out and seeking some advice.
Maybe we'll do a session on Q&A.
That
Good.
would be yes. I think
I'll
there's
follow
a
up.
thought
Yeah.
there. Okay, let's think about that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kathleen. Have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Happy
you.
procurement.